Hi, I'm Jack Hazen, cross-country coach at Milhorn University, and I'm also associate professor of physical education, even though I don't teach anymore. I only coach. I coach both the men and the women, so I have anywhere from 30 to 50 athletes, which I coach year-round, coaching cross-country in the fall, indoor track in the winter, and outdoor track in the spring. So in essence, unlike most of the coaches here at the university and anywhere, there's no off season for this kind of a situation. So I coach year round, and I love it.
Okay, so can you tell us how you got interested in cross country from high school? Did you run in high school or a family member?
Yeah, I didn't run cross country in high school because they didn't have cross country. This was like in the previous century, and cross country wasn't even a part of high school sports. I did run track, but I didn't run distance. I was a sprinter and a hurdler and a long jumper, and I did play football, and I thought that's what I wanted to do in college, and I also thought that's what I wanted to do as a profession, to be a high school football coach. Unfortunately, my mother, I grew up on a farm, and my father was a dairy farmer, and we didn't have much money, and my mother was a school teacher, and she set aside some money each month for me to go to college. So when it was time to go to college, and I announced that I wanted to go to a football school, Muskingum, that's where all my friends were going. They had a great football program back then, and she informed me that I was going to go to Asbury College, which is a school where she went. She termed it as a preacher's college, and she wanted me to go there. They didn't even have football, so I told her there's no way I'm going to go to that school. But after 4 years of being there, I had no choice because she was paying for it. I graduated from Asbury with a bachelor's in biology and physical education, and no experience in football. So I went then to Ohio State to get my graduate degree and my master's degree in anatomy and physiology. And while there, I was able to earn a graduate assistantship, and I got to work closely with Woody Hayes, which was a famous coach back then. You probably don't remember him, but he won some national championships, and he was a legend. And Woody would actually come over to the physical education center, and he likes to play handball in the morning, and we would take turns challenging him. He was a very good football player because he was he was pretty heavy, and I didn't think he would be very good, but he was outstanding. He had a kill shot that very few people could beat him. But anyway, making a long story short, I got to know him and took some of his classes and told him my plight, that I wanted to be a football coach. I had no experience, so he set me up with a coach at Mount Vernon High School, which he considered to be the best high school coach in Ohio, a guy by the name of Chuck Stobart, who went on to be the head coach, head assistant with Bo Schembechler at Michigan. And at any rate, I coached football my first year in high school and taught biology. And the principal came to me after football season and said, "Would you be interested in coaching track?" And I go, "Well, I don't think so." And he told me what it paid, and I was single then, and so I said, "Oh, I'll give it a try." And so I started coaching track in the spring. We had some good distance runners, and so the next year they encouraged me to start a cross country team, but I was still locked into football, and so I coached football another year. But then the third year at Mount Vernon High School, I decided to give up football coaching and coach cross country and track. I found that in football, I had to coach kind of against my personality. Football coaches back then, and maybe now, I don't know, not so much probably, but you had to yell and scream and be tough and mean and demand discipline. And track and cross country, I could be myself, use my own personality, relate to the athletes, and I just fell in love with that kind of an atmosphere. So the summer of the third year, one of my shot putters who had come to Milhorn University came back in the summer and said our our track and cross country coach at Milhorn has resigned. You should check into it. He knew that I was from this area. I grew up in the Alliance, Marlington area. And so in 1967, I came up and interviewed and got hired at Milhorn. And so I've been here ever since then. And started out coaching just men's cross country and track and field. And I was a professor of kinesiology and exercise science, and taught a full load. I don't know, looking back on it, I don't know how I did that. And then eventually in about 20 years, when women's sports started coming into being, they had me coaching men's and women's cross country, men's and women's track, and I just told the administration, I don't think this is fair to me or the athletes, that I need a full-time assistant. And the response at that point was, we can't hire you a full-time assistant, but we will hire a head coach, so you have to give up one or the other. And so at that point I decided to give up track and field and become just the cross-country coach. And that's a long answer to a short question.
Great. How many years have you been running personally, and why do you do it?
Well, I started running after my football coaching days with some of my high school athletes. So I've been coaching. This is my 48th year at Milhorn, and I coached at Mount Vernon for 3 years, so probably around 50 years. And I never ran to do road races because right from the beginning we had good teams at Milhorn. After a year or two, in fact, in 1972 we won a national championship, and so I considered, and this is kind of selfish pride maybe, but I didn't want to tarnish my reputation by running because I knew I wasn't very fast. So I never ran in road races or competition, but I ran pretty much every day, and I kept it kind of light, 3 miles, which to some people that's a lot, but it's really not. So probably for about 45 years I ran 3 miles a day, every day, and by that I mean I averaged 3 miles a day, 21 miles per week, and sometimes you're traveling and you can't run, but I would always make it up because I was focused. I kept a training log like my athletes did, and I pretty much kept it so that I could say I ran 3 miles a day. Now at age 75, I'm down to 2 miles a day, and quite a bit slower than it was back then.
What made you decide to start the cross-country program at Milhorn?
Well, I actually didn't start it. It was, in a way I started it. Your question is relevant because they had cross-country 3 or 4 years before I came. I don't think they ever won a meet. And the year before I came, they had canceled it because of lack of interest. There was no one that really wanted to run it. So in a sense, I revived it rather than started it. But I went up to the dorm. Actually, I recruited one really good guy that year from Canton, McKinley. His name was Warren Bellamy. He was one of the best runners in the state of Ohio, and I had nobody to go with him. So I went up to the dormitory and begged people and recruited people so that we could, as you know, you need 5 people to score as a team. So we that first year we got 5 people. 4 of them weren't very good, and I think we won maybe 1 meet. Every year after that, I would recruit diligently, and I would get 7 or 8 or 9 new runners. And so the people that ran the year before weren't good enough to run on the next year's team, and that went on for about 3 or 4 years until, like I mentioned, in 1972 we were good enough that we surprised everybody, including ourselves, by winning the national championships.
All right. How has cross country impacted your life?
Well, I think from a physical fitness standpoint, it's I always ran to be fit, to have cardiovascular fitness. Both my father and mother had, and they lived a late life, but as most Americans, they suffer from cardiovascular problems, high blood pressure, and my mother eventually had a stroke, and so I wanted to ward that off, and so I felt that running would certainly improve my fitness and probably improve my quality of life. And more recent research shows that running actually, because of the bringing in a high level of oxygen through the red blood cells, that it's actually healthy for the brain and actually stimulates intellect growth. I don't know if that ever happened to me, but I like to think it warded off maybe dementia or something like that.
Have you ever had any major injuries from running?
I actually haven't had any running injuries per se. About 17 or 18 years ago, I had a massive blood clot in my leg, which was brought about by no one knows why. It could be genetics. It certainly wasn't from running. But the fact that I was a runner, the day before I actually had the massive blood clot, which has really damaged my left leg quite a bit. It was a massive blockage. Fortunately, they put a filter in my inferior vena cava and it didn't go to my lungs or my heart. But my doctor, because he knew I was a runner and he knew me well, when I went to him and told him I had a pain in my calf and a little bump there, he said, "Oh, I think you probably just tweaked it running, you probably stepped off the curb wrong or something, and I wouldn't worry about it." And that night, in the middle of the night, I woke up and my leg was about 3 times the size. And so indirectly, running caused, if I hadn't been a runner, he might have sent me to the hospital to get it checked out and do an ultrasound. But that's been a real, kind of a real setback. And I have to wear a support running type sock, but all my doctors told me to keep running, that was healthy, and it aches a bit, but it's nothing that really is debilitating. So indirectly, I had an injury.
Can you tell us how you balance coaching in your personal life and some of the challenges that go along with that?
Yeah, it's as I mentioned, it's quite different than most coaching situations because there is no off season. The athletes that run distance have to train year round because of it is a cardiovascular fitness type thing, and if you take time off, you end up de-training, and it's not good. So because we have cross country and then go right into indoor and then right into outdoor, it's year round. But I've managed, I think, my time so that I can spend a lot of time with my athletes, but still have a good family life. And fortunately, my wife is big into horses, and she spends a lot of time at the barn when I'm doing, on the weekends when I'm doing running things. She's doing, I always say she's horsing around, but she's doing it with real horses. And so that's been a real good balance for us, and so I think that's how it's really worked out.
Can you walk us through a day in the life of Jack Hazen?
Oh, I don't know. It's I get up at about 6:15. My wife teaches school, so she heads off, gets ready for school, and I help her fix her coffee and get her going. And then when she leaves, I take care of the dogs and do my 2-mile run. And then I shower and get to school about 9:30 or 10 o'clock every day. I'm in the office, and I probably take on more than I probably should, in that I have other races. We do community runs, we do an invitational, we do the district meets, which takes a lot of planning and time. So I'm pretty much in my office doing office work during the day. And then at 4 o'clock every day is practice, and that usually is for 2 hours to 2.5 hours. And then in the evening, I actually feel guilty if I don't make some recruiting calls, and I try to get those done by 8 o'clock at night because I don't like to call late. And more recently, it's become easier because with social media and texting, it's more more relaxed and more less invasive to the people I'm calling, and so that's been kind of a blessing to do that, and then I try to get my 8 hours of sleep and start all over again.
Can you tell us about the training plan you have came up with?
Well, I've been fortunate to be part of many clinics, and I've always been drawn to go to seminars, and our national affiliation collegiately was with the NAIA, and so at one point I became the delegate for the NAIA to the USA Track and Field Board of Directors, and USA Track and Field is the national governing body for track and field. And so I spent 16 years on the board of directors just because I was from a small school and they needed a representative on this. It was the act of Congress, the Sports Act, that required that every national sport organization had to have a delegate on the board of trustees. So that opened many doors for me, and I got involved with coaching education in USA Track and Field. Each sport has a governing body. Swimming has their own, gymnastics has their own. All the Olympic sports have national governing bodies, and ours is USA Track and Field. And so as a part of that, I took advantage of getting to know Olympic coaches and becoming acquainted with them and visiting with them and learning their techniques. And so through the years, through all of these opportunities, I still get invited to the Olympic altitude seminar, which we're not at altitude, but we have some athletes using altitude, and so I like to stay abreast on what's the latest scientific things that can be done to improve fitness and athletic performance. So it's been a long journey, but a very gratifying one to get to know all of these people that are at the elite level, coaching elite athletes, and we can certainly take a lot from what they do with their athletes and apply it, not at the same intensity and level, but apply it to our athletes to bring them along and develop them to their full potential.
Can you tell us what makes your training plan different from other elite schools?
Well, I think the big difference in our plan is, in running, it's all about stressing the body and then allowing it to adapt. And I think we do probably the best job of stressing the body at the right level, not too much, and certainly up to what is needed to make changes, and then allowing the body to have recovery time so it can regenerate and actually what we call adapt over and above, and that's where that's how people get faster and improve their times. And I think we're unique in that we're always looking for new ways to change it, and I think someone of my history would be tempted to just stay with the old practice that's worked all these years. But having known a very significant Olympic coach, and he was just elected or nominated or voted the second ever Legends Coach of the Year in the United States. He said a long time ago when he was helping me with my program, he said, next year with my team, we're going to do this. And I said, well, that's a lot different than what you've done in the past. And he says, yes, it is. And my question to him was, how do you know that's going to work with your athletes that you're preparing for national championships? And his response to me was, how will I know unless I try it? And I thought, wow, here's an Olympic coach that's considered the best and one of the best in the world, and he's willing to experiment and try something new to see if it works on his athletes. So it's always an experiment. And another thing I think that makes our program may be different is that, and I learned this from this guy as well, is that every athlete is an experiment of one. In other words, you can't do the same thing for everyone. You have to be individualized. And so I think the uniqueness of our program lies in the fact that we could probably get our athletes fitter than we do, faster, but at the risk of injury or breakdown. And so I pride our program in the fact that we very seldom get athletes injured to the degree that some of what we consider some of the best distance running programs in America, some of the best distance running schools in America, who have athletes that are really, really good at the top level. But if you look at their whole team, a lot of them were injured during the way and have given up and quit. And I don't think that's fair to the whole of the team. And so we try not to do that.
You mentioned Olympic coach. How did you meet him?
Well, Dr. Biho was back in the 70s when we won the national championships in 1972. He was a coach at Adams State University, and they're a school in Alamosa, Colorado that's at 7,500 feet altitude. And after we beat them, we never beat them again at nationals. We beat them one time. But that was when we invited them to Malone, to the Malone Invitational, and beat them on our own home course. And even that year at the nationals, at the end of the year, they beat us. He won 7 straight national titles. They've won over 30 national titles in track and cross country at Adams State, and he's coached Olympians. And so early on in the early 70s, I got to know him because we were competitors. But in the sport of cross country and running and track and field, the coaches are friends and they share ideas. And Coach Biho he always says, I'm an educator first. I want to share my information. He in fact started the U.S. coaching education program in America. He went to Europe and saw the East Germans and the Brits and the Polish coaches having an organization that they learned together as a national team. And he came back to America and started coaching education and developed it. And I was on the ground floor of that, seeing that develop. And so I've just been very fortunate to have Coach Biho as a mentor through these years, and being advised by him, being a friend of his. He's right now next week he turns 86 years of age. And he still travels around the world giving seminars. He still coaches 8 elite athletes, and he's an amazing person. And so he's kind of not only my mentor, but my idol. As people ask me, when are you going to retire? And I tell them, well, Coach Biho's 10 years older than I am, and he's still going strong. So that's my plan.
Can you explain to us how you were selected to be the coach of the 2012 London Olympic distance team?
No, I don't know how that happened. It's voted upon by a committee of about 15 people, which include coaches, USA Track and Field administrators, and athletes, Olympic caliber athletes. And I was shocked to be selected. I think it was partly because of my involvement in USA Track and Field from the board level for many years. I think it was because of the successes we've had here at Malone University with our athletes and our winning record and the reputation that Malone University has nationally and in some respects internationally. But I was thrilled to do that. I really think that the committee looks at not only getting just elite coaches that coach elite athletes, but they like to give it to college coaches. And they also like to not always give it to a big school coach. And so I think I kind of lucked out in being probably identified as a small school coach that could be considered. And so, but I was overwhelmed to have it happen, and I'm not really sure how it happened.
Can you give us your top 2 highlights from coaching the London Olympics?
Oh, there were so many. riding on the bus with Usain Bolt was pretty cool, and one of the coaches that I coached with taught me how to tweet when I was over there, and so I got to tweet back that I was riding on the same bus to the Olympic track with Usain Bolt, and I beat him off the bus, and that was fun. It's hard. I mean, the whole experience. It was 6 weeks of just a whirlwind. We went to Birmingham, England for training camp, and I was there with some of the greatest athletes in the world, and some of the greatest coaches in the world. Eating with them, hanging out with them, talking with them, and then being in the village for that length of time around all of these athletes. And I guess probably the greatest thrill was, and this, I tell people that we were the most successful in distance that we'd ever been in the Olympics. We had more medals and more people in the finals, and the distance runners did great, and so that made me really feel good. But at the same time, I tell people I can take no credit for that, because these athletes have their own coaches, their own agents. I pretty much just lucked out that all these athletes came at that time. But I like to think that I helped them in some ways, and I was there at the right time, and so I can feel good about that. So that would be a highlight, that the distance runners did well. I know one of our technicians that does biomechanical analysis. He was early in Birmingham. He was filming the hurlers and the sprinters and the throwers and jumpers that usually get most of our medals. And he looked over at me and he said, "Hey, so coach, how many medals are you guys going to get?" And I said, we'll get 4 or 5. And he goes, "Yeah, right." And we actually did come through and get medals and place people, and almost all of our guys got in the finals, which that was unbelievable. And so that was a really good feeling. But again, really can't take credit for that.
So you mentioned that you had a national championship one year. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about that?
Well, we actually had a number of national championships since then, but the first one will be the most memorable because it was so unexpected. We had some guys that had gone to the nationals the year before. The first year we went to nationals, we finished 34th. The next year we went to nationals, we finished 22nd. And so in 1971 we were 22nd, I think. And so in 1972 our goal was to be in the top 10. If we could be in the top 10, we would be ecstatic. That would be just unbelievable. So our guys were so relaxed and loose and no pressure, because nobody expected us to do very well. We were 22nd the year before. If we were 15th or 16th, that would be okay. But, man, it'd be awesome to be top 10. Back in those days, they didn't have computers. 1972, they had to do it all by hand. And so in the NAI, there were 35 teams that made it to nationals. And this was in Liberty, Missouri, which is on the outskirts of Kansas City. And after the meet, we went back to the hotel and showered, and about 3 or 4 hours later, we went to a banquet where they announced the scores. When you look back on it, it's kind of ridiculous. Who would go to a national championship and watch it and not know who won? But nobody really knew who won back then, because they were looking for a team from Kansas called Fort Hays State. They were looking at Eastern New Mexico University, and they had some foreign athletes, and they were awesome. Adams State was expected to be up there. Nobody even considered Malone. So we went to this banquet, and I'll never forget sitting in the banquet with our athletes, And they said, no. Now, we had dinner, and they came in and said, we have the results tabulated. Yay, 5 hours later. And so here's the top 10, or I think they did the top 20. So they went down to, and so we kept, 15, 14. Oh, they got down to 10, and we go, yay, we're in the top 10. And so they went 9, 8, 7, and then we started going, maybe we weren't in the top 20. Maybe we were 22nd or something again, 21st maybe. And they got down to 3 and 2, and we were going, no, shoot, we didn't even, and they said, and the national champion, Malone College. And we couldn't believe it. And there will never be another moment like that for me or those athletes to have overcome those kinds of odds and to actually perform that way. And back then you had to be in the top 15 to be an All-American, and one of our guys was 12th, and he was our first All-American ever in the history of the school, I think. And so yeah, that will be always remembered as the greatest probably accomplishment of a team. But since then we've won other championships, and it's great, and those were all in the NAI, and now we're in the NCAA. And so I'm looking at, is it possible in the NCAA? We're gonna sure try to do it, and maybe replicate the 72 thing.
What kind of characteristics do you recognize in the men who were on those national championship teams?
Well, they were all very dedicated runners, and I think that's probably, they were fierce competitors. One of them ran, back in those days, that was pretty phenomenal to run under a 4:10 in the mile. And I had a guy that ran 4:07 in the mile. He was the All-American. He would just lay it on the line. And then I had a steeplechaser that he ran 8:52 and was an All-American. And that was that record was held for over 35 years, I think, until Aaron Milhorn broke it. And so they were just really hard-working, dedicated athletes, and it just all came together at that point. And so, before that, it was in 68 and 69, I was having trouble getting guys to buy into, back in those days, LSD was the big thing, not the drug, long, slow distance. And we believed in running long, like over 100 miles a week. Some of my teams, that team, the 72 team, we did very little speed work. We would do 400-meter intervals back then. That was the only real workout we would do. The rest of the time we just run distance. And we probably, the top 7 would average over 120 to 125 miles a week. And leading up to that, to get them to do that, in 1968 and 69, I'm not sure exactly which year, I always tell the story of, now we do a long run once a week. And back then I was trying to get them to do a long run. But a long run would be like 10 or 12 miles. And these guys would go out and they'd run about 5 or 6 miles, and they go, Coach, we have to rest, we can't keep going. And I couldn't get them to run, a sustained long run, which we know now is imperative to build good aerobic power and develop the cardiovascular system. So I tell the story of, a day much like today. It was sunny out, and it was in September, and the guys were coming to practice thinking they're gonna do a run, and I had a van. I checked the school van out, and I said, guys, since it's so nice out today, we're gonna skip practice, and I'm gonna take you guys on a picnic. Oh, Coach, you're the best. I said, pile into the van, let's go. So I took them down to Waynesburg, Ohio. And I said, okay, jump out, and I'll turn the van around. And so they jumped out, and I turned the van around. They thought I was going to park it and get the picnic basket out or something. And I rolled down the window and I said, "Guys, there ain't no picnic, and I'll see you back at Malone." And I took off. And it's close to 18 miles from Waynesburg to Canton. And they had to find their way back. And they missed dinner. And they were so mad they didn't speak to me for about 2 days. But they learned that they could run 18 miles. And that was kind of the turning point in our program. So then in 72, these guys were running, you know, like I mentioned, way more miles than we do now. Milhorn is probably the highest mileage guy, and you know, he gets up to 100. But these guys were all over, and on that 72 team, although I had, you know, a bunch of runners, I only had 5 really good ones. Those were the ones that scored. So if we'd have gotten anybody injured, it would have been all over for winning the national title. But somehow these guys survived running 100 miles, 120 miles a week, and we did it.
You mentioned Aaron Milhorn. Who is he, and what record did he break?
He broke the steeplechase record of Rick Horton's, and I think he ran his junior year. He was actually ranked 5th in the United States in the steeplechase, and had he stuck with it, he could have probably made the Olympic trials. But he just wasn't motivated to run and decided to quit.
Looking back over the years, how has the cross country program changed from when you first started until now?
Well, it's changed in terms of, you know, the equipment we use, the methods that we use, the shoes that we use, the things that we do now that we had no idea about training back in the early days, like altitude training. We have a couple guys using altitude chambers now, and so a lot of things technology-wise has changed. A lot of our coaching techniques have changed. The equipment has changed. The uniforms have changed. But basically the way the team makeup, I think, is the same as it was in the 1972 team. You know, we have a close-knit team that's very loyal, that help each other out, as evidenced by our guys who sacrifice living in the nicer dorms and live in the freshman dorms just so they can all be together. And I think that's been consistent through the years. So in one respect, a lot of things have changed, but in terms of the overall way I handle the team, the relationships we have with the athletes, with each other, that's remained constant, I think, through the years.
You've been talking about altitude. How exactly does that help you running?
Well, we know that the Kenyans have always excelled, and not always, but recently, when they learned that they could run distance, they are superior because they've lived at altitude and have run all their lives. They don't have school buses or bicycles. They walk or run to school, and so they get a lot of cardiovascular development, and it's at altitude. And the altitude, when you're living at altitude, it's thin air, we call it. It's less oxygen, and so the body has to work harder at producing red blood cells to carry oxygen, to supply the needs created by running. And so if your body adjusts by building more, we call it erythropoietin, or EPO. EPO is what Lance Armstrong took illegally, the drug EPO. But athletes that live at altitude or train at altitude or have altitude tents are actually creating EPO legally to create more red blood cells, which eventually carries more oxygen, which gives your muscles more energy, and so it produces faster times.
How good of a relationship do you have with your team members?
I don't know. You'll have to ask some of them. We try to have I try to run a very fair and democratic type environment, except when it comes to what training method we're going to use. And I asked my athletes to believe in what we're doing, actually to have an unshatterable belief in what we're doing in order to you got to believe in what you're doing to do well and to be successful. And so I think I have a good relationship with most of my athletes. Often, or not often, but occasionally we don't see eye to eye, and I'm sure that some people have some differences, but all in all, I think we have a pretty positive, healthy relationship with the whole team.
What is it like having coached 2 generations of runners?
It's pretty neat to have people that ran for me to have their kids come and run on the team. That's pretty awesome, pretty rewarding, and a lot of fun. And usually I get good parental support. Actually get donations back from those kinds of people, help support the program.
How many generations of runners have you actually coached?
Well, only 2.
Cool.
Yeah.
Can you name any of them that have done that?
Well, my grad assistant for Cinco, both of it, his mom and dad were good runners for me. Hannah Thompson's dad was on the 72 national championship team. So I've had several.
Can you tell us a normal cross-country running and a day of an athlete, or a week of an athlete? It's like what they would do, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
And training-wise?
Yeah.
Yeah. As I mentioned, each athlete is an experiment in one, but we've developed a program that is based on percentages, and so on each day we do the same thing, but we do it differently. In other words, we all have mileage goals that we have, and so some people might have 30 miles a week, some 40 miles, some 50, some 80, Lauren 90 or 100. And so each day is broken down into percentages. And so if today is a 10% day, it's different for each person based on their maximum goal for the day. But traditionally, our program is that on Sundays, we run a long run, which is usually slower in speed. We have different paces at different times of the season, but we encourage our athletes to get up early and do it if they can, and we sometimes offer that at 7 a.m. in the park before church to get their run in. Otherwise, they do it on their own. And then Monday is a recovery day. As I mentioned before, it's important to let your body recover from all the stress that you give it on the hard workout days. Tuesday is a very hard day. We call it Tempo Tuesday because we call tempo anaerobic pace, or it's the pace in which you're running so fast that you can't supply enough oxygen quite to sustain it. So it's hard. You go into oxygen debt or close to it, or run right around that area. And we break that up in many ways, but Tuesday is a difficult day, intensity-wise. Wednesday we consider it a medium day, so it's the second longest volume day of the week. So if on Sunday we run 20% volume, on Wednesday we might run 18% volume. And again, based on the time of year it is, we have 4 speeds that we run at. And then Thursday is a recovery day after those 2 heavy days. And if we race on the weekend, Friday is a recovery day. So we actually have 3 recovery days. Now if we don't race on the weekend, on Saturday, then Friday will probably be another, we call it neuromuscular day, or a little faster day. And Saturday would be the recovery day, getting ready for the long run, which is a stressful workout. So that's pretty much the pattern that we follow year round.
What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of being a small running school?
Well, disadvantages is we're not funded like a big school. And in fact, we try to do some of the similar kinds of things that an Ohio State would do, but it's hard to duplicate their budget. So we improvise. That's why I've chosen through the years to have the Invitational, which brings in extra money. and we do fundraisers, and we have districts, which brings in a little bit of money. We have the Moose Run, which brings in some money to help us overcompensate for that. So that creates a lot more work for me. If I did away with all those extra things, I could, feel more relaxed and have more time to spend with the athletes and coaching them. But we wouldn't be able to do the kinds of traveling and things that we do. So, and so that's a disadvantage. I think an advantage is that the thing that's kept me at Malone all these years is that we foster development of the total athlete, the holistic approach. We don't just, sure, we try to get to run fast and win meets and get very fit, but we also feel it's very important to stimulate the intellect and prepare people to be in the world and survive professionally. And Malone believes in integrating faith and learning, and so we are happy to be a part of developing the spiritual aspect of the athlete, and just try to I think the advantage of a small school like Malone is that we develop the whole person, and it's intentional in all of those areas. And at a big school, it can happen, but it's not as easy for the athlete to be affected in the way that they are affected at Malone.
Earlier you said about the aerobic pace. Is there any other paces, and can you define them and tell them what they do?
Well, the aerobic pace is below that threshold that we talked about, and so we're always about building a strong aerobic base, which means that we're building more red blood cells and more capillaries to support the other work that we do. And then on Tuesdays, the tempo work is to try to raise that threshold of tempo so that we can run faster and actually not use as many red blood cells. And so at this time of the year in the last month, we've actually been going past tempo, and we've been doing faster pace work that we can't do for a very long period of time, but we do short bursts of it, like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or we do thousands or mile repeats above threshold. The body can't really do that for a long period of time, but in the peaking phase, getting ready for the championships, when we want to run our fastest time of the year, that's when we incorporate these, we call them max VO2s or maximum oxygen uptake type workouts that really stress the body even more and produce enzymes and ventilatory thresholds that produce faster times.
Earlier you also mentioned the Moose Run. What is that, and is anyone welcome to it?
It's a fun run that we do early in the season before the high schools are legally allowed to start to compete. So we get permission from the state to allow them to use the school funds and the school buses. They can't wear their school uniforms or call themselves the school name, but it's a relay type race that the athletes do early in the season, kind of like a scrimmage before they're really allowed to start racing. And we make it fun, so we have a 2-mile loop on campus. We have some logs that they jump over, which they don't normally do. We have a water pit that they run through, and we spray them with water, which doesn't usually occur in a normal race. And then we have a mascot that's a big moose costume that we tell the athletes that are participating, if the moose catches them and touches them when it's their turn to be on the relay on their team, they get seconds added to their team time. The team is made up of 5 runners, and each runner runs 2 miles, so it's a 10-mile distance for the 5 runners. And it's a lot of fun, and we have 5 or 6 or even 700 runners come to that.
Can you give any advice to someone who is thinking about joining the cross-country team or running in general?
Well, our goal this year is to, we've been a team of around 30, with the men and women together, around 30 athletes. And our goal is to get up to 50 this year with this next recruiting class. And so in that class, I'm trying to recruit naturally 5 or 6 really talented athletes that are some of the best in the state. We're recruiting athletes against Ohio State or Kent State, or many times the athlete has it down to a Division I school or Malone, and we we hope we've actually signed already 4 or 5 guys in that caliber, and a couple girls. We're working on a couple more girls, and then after we get those really talented runners, we want to get some middle of the road runners that in high school maybe they've come from smaller schools and they haven't been trained really hard and they're running decent times, and we hope to bring them in and have them improve with our program, which we've proven over the years that we can do. And on last year's guys team, and we finished 9th in the nation in NCAA, we had a guy that was one of our top runners that was a walk-on and never ran very fast in high school and improved almost, improved almost 4 minutes in a 5K. And that's rare, but those are the kind of things that we're looking for in these